As Pastor Tom said, during the first stretch of summer, we're going to listen to Jesus say to us, "Come to you, all you who are weary and who are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." We're going to ask, what does that mean for us in the life we live with our bodies, with our minds, with our soul? What does it mean for us to have a ministry with the world where people need rest? This sermon series is going to run the risk of being practical and relevant. So I was going to quip, maybe some of you would like to get a pillow, and there's some extras here. But I suspect that for pretty much all of us, rest is a live topic in our lives. Kind of like Betsy was doing with the kids, we're going to say Jesus' words in Matthew 11, 28 to 30 for every single worship service. It's going to be one of our readings. And the idea is that we bring this text into our actual lives, that we ingest it, and it becomes part of us. It's a great text to memorize. So let's listen for God's word as we bring Jesus' words into us in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 11, beginning in verse 28. He says to us, "Come to me, all you who are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Rest. How does that sound to you? Does it sound like a cold drink in the shade on a sweltering July day? When it comes to our mind, our body, our soul, just our being, how often does it feel like we actually have that drink of rest in hand and we are taking it in? For me, the moments are fleeting. So I told Heather that Pastor Tom and I were going to be preaching this series together on Jesus' invitation, "Come to me, I will give you rest." And when Heather heard this, she gave me a look. I told her, "Yeah, I know. I recognize the irony." One of the advantages of knowing that your spouse is going to be sitting in the pew while you are preaching a sermon series on "I will give you rest" is that you just cannot fool yourself. Resting is not my strong suit. One of the most challenging Lenten disciplines I ever undertook was when I committed to wake up every day of Lent, except Sundays. That's my work day. Every day except Sunday, I would wake up without my alarm. It was hard, and I still woke up by 5:15 every morning. So, for my life, take as an example one of my Fridays. Fridays is technically one of my days off. When I fill out vacation forms to take vacation here with WPC, I don't put a V by Friday, I put a DO for day off. But on Fridays, I tend to spend the morning finalizing my sermon, I answer church email, I do some planning for the Sunday 2 weeks out. And then in the afternoon, it's housework, and it's yard work, and it's running errands, and it's keeping up with all those odds and ends that just kind of come with life. And if you are listening to this and say, "Hey, that kind of sounds like my day off." Anyone there? Good. I'm not alone. It makes me just another 21st century American. Really? I'm not complaining. I don't really mind this. I like getting stuff done. But here's the thing. Come Friday, almost without fail, at the end of the day, a voice in me says, "I should have been able to do more." And since Heather is sitting right there, to keep me honest, I have to say, that voice doesn't just talk to me at the end of the day Friday. that message, I should have been able to do more, just hangs over my life every day. Am I alone in this neurosis? I'm actually asking you. I see some net nods, but I'd like some verbal response. Am I alone in this neurosis? No. Thank you. It feels good to preach in solidarity with people who know that we swim in a culture that values productivity and accomplishment over rest. And it can feel that there's so much to do. Maybe it's keeping up with the schedule that we have created in order to give our kids as many opportunities as we can. Maybe it's staying on top of work, where employers and clients tend not to say, I'd like you to get more rest. I hear from some that retirement doesn't always make a difference. There are people who have told me, I am busier in retirement than I was when I was working. And even if the calendar is spacious and we're getting enough sleep, we feel like we're living at a manageable pace, just how rested do our minds and our hearts feel as we carry those burdens that make us weary? The one Betsy, I think, was talking about, the troubles that we have, our worries over a loved one, anxiety over the future, regrets about our past. When Jesus calls to weary, burdened people, he's not calling to someone else. He's calling to us. But does it surprise us that Jesus calls people to come to him to rest? I don't think we talk about this much in the church. What do you think? When we talk about Jesus living as Jesus' disciples, doesn't it usually involve a call to action? And we'd be right about that. All we have to do is look at Jesus' own life and see how he does call us to be peacemakers and to shine his light in the world. How Jesus calls us to love our neighbor and even our enemies. How Jesus calls us to be like him, people who aren't just hearers of the word, but folks who go out to live as doers of the word. People who serve the poor. People who work for justice. It feels to me like WPC's DNA really doesn't allow the church to say, I think right now we're doing too much missions work. It's more that we keep on finding additional work to get in on because we believe it's Jesus' kind of work and he's leading us into it. I'm grateful for this. The need is real, and as 16th century Christian St. Teresa of Avila said, Christ has no body but yours. No hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the feet with which he walks to do good. Yours are the hands with which he blesses the world. But here's the thing. And with all the action we see from Jesus in the Gospels, it might surprise us to hear it. At the center of Jesus' own life was a habitual, practiced rest. We see all through the Gospels how Jesus himself would withdraw to lonely places to pray, to find solitude, to be restored. There would be times when the activity with the disciples was so hectic they didn't even have time to eat, and Jesus would say, "Come away with me. We need to have some restoration." Core to Jesus' own relationship with God was this regular unburdening. The life Jesus lived, he didn't just live on his own willpower. He lived by the life of God welling up within him. And in order for him to receive that, he had to make space in order for it to come to him. And as he looked at the people who were coming to him, the crowds of ordinary folks just like us, and as he peered into their hearts, he He saw need for a repose that was about more than just getting a good night's sleep and doing less. It was about where their lives were truly, finally lodged. He wanted to give them a different yoke, the yoke that he wore with God. And really, that yoke metaphor is kind of curious that Jesus chooses this, because a yoke is an instrument of work. But the yoke he offered wasn't going to harness them to the expectations of others. It wasn't going to attach them to their self-imposed burdens. He wasn't going to yoke them with some of the burdens that can come with certain ways of practicing religion. Jesus was yoking people to himself and to God's gracious, loving presence in him. When he said, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me," he wasn't offering rest that was first about doing less. It was about experiencing how the weight of our lives is not ours to carry alone. It was about learning how to live not by our own doing, but by our being with God. This invitation from Jesus just might be the most encouraging invitation ever given. But in a way, it isn't anything new, because Jesus' call is resonant with an ancient foundational practice of Judaism, the observance of Sabbath. By Jesus' day, Jews have been observing Sabbath for more than 1,000 years. Ever since God led Israel out of slavery in Egypt and on the way to the Promised Land gave them the Ten Commandments. In Deuteronomy 5, that's what Moses is recounting to the people just as they're about to enter the Promised Land. And so along with the other 9 commandments, he recounts the one that says, "Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work." But now listen to the reason for Sabbath rest. It wasn't, God knows that you need time to rest and recharge so you can go out there and work hard again. The reason was, you were a slave. You were a slave in Egypt. And the Lord your God brought you from out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. The Sabbath said, you are free from having to be endlessly productive. It said, your life does not rest on your own labor. It said, you do not belong to your work. It said, you are liberated from living as though your own efforts are going to save you. And so each week, the Sabbath came with its call, first of all, not to do anything. Eugene Peterson says that Shabbat, the Hebrew word for Sabbath, basically means quit, stop. Take a break. Do that in order to rest your whole being in the promise that we live in a world that is God's world. A world that doesn't revolve around human doing, it involves around God's enlivening. And therefore, we live by God's grace and not by all of our doing. And so, regular Sabbath keeping casts the grace of life rested in God across the other 6 days of the week. So we begin to learn to live in a mode of being in which all of our life, including our work, rests in God's presence and care. So Jesus, who kept Sabbath and who called himself the Lord of the Sabbath, invites us to come to him. Come to him with weariness in living by our own steam. Come to him with burdens of mind, body, and soul to be dealt with more gently by him than by the world. To be dealt with more gently by him than we will probably deal with ourselves. I am gentle and humble in heart, he says, and you will find rest for your souls. The rest is, above all, simply his loving presence in our lives. The life we live, whatever it is, we live it with him. Here's where it gets practical, because it makes sense to ask, but how might we do this? How might we actually come to Jesus with our lives and to begin learning this rest? And so each week of the series, we're going to name practical ways that we can open our lives to the rest Jesus gives. So these practices will be in the bulletin. As Pastor Tom said, it would be great if we took these practices with us and began asking, is there a way God's calling me to incorporate this into my life so I can learn to live more of my life resting in Jesus' presence and care? We're going to send them out in the newsletter bulletin, so if you miss a week, there it will be. But we should know about these practices that none of them is magic. It's not like taking a pill. All of them require a kind of learning so that they become incorporated into our lives and become kind of holy habits. But what they do as we engage them is make us present and available to the Savior who is humbly and gently yoking himself to us. So this week's practice is keeping Sabbath. And it says in the bulletin, and as I'm sure all of us know, keeping Sabbath is simple, but it is not easy, especially for 21st century Americans, because it involves setting aside time. Traditionally, for Christians, it's been from sundown on Saturday until sundown on Sunday. And during that time, to rest from work, to worship God, to do what delights. I realize that for some people, 24 hours just isn't going to work. And if that's the case, well, try to adopt a Sabbath practice that's like a micro practice, maybe a couple of hours on a day. We all have different life situations, and so Sabbath practice is going to look for different from person to person and household to household. I know it's different for me as a 50-year-old guy than it was when our kids were 5 and 7. But here are some ideas. Turn off digital devices. Take a walk. Enjoy creation. Eat a favorite meal, maybe with family and friends. Listen to music. Read a book. Spend time alone with God. Let yourself nap. You don't have to power through the fatigue on the Sabbath. Just let it wash over you and sleep. Do what brings joy, however small it might be. The Sabbath is time for liberation from the need to work, to produce, to accomplish. As you might imagine, Sunday doesn't work as my Sabbath, and so I take mine on Saturday. So 5 o'clock on Friday evening, right as that voice is telling me, Matt, you should have been able to get more done, I put my phone on Do Not Disturb. I turn on some music. I wait for Heather to come home from her work and pour a delightful beverage. I go into my Sabbath, and whatever work didn't get done just didn't get done. And on Saturday, I sleep in. I read. I pray. I take a longer walk. I enjoy undistracted time with family. I savor a piece of 100% cacao chocolate. when my Sabbath concludes on Saturday evening, I look at my email and I just kind of look at my life with a more settled heart and mind. My body tends to feel less plagued by the issues I so often carry in my tissues. It is such a good and gracious thing that Jesus doesn't say, don't be weary, don't be burdened. He just says, come to me, and I will give you rest. His grace is in us, urging us to receive and practice the gift. Thanks be to God.